Welcome into Fantasy Football Night in America. It's yet another edition of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm your host, Eric Balkman, at Eric Balkman on the X. You know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, one of the sponsors of this show tonight. Check them out, myffpc.com. My guest co-host tonight is no stranger to these airwaves. He is back with a vengeance this week. You know him from his writings over at RotoBaller and Fantasy Pros, and of course, the host of the Woo Fantasy podcast. It is the Roto Superstar himself, at Roto Superstar on X, Brandon Murchison. Merch, what's up? You excited for this Thursday night game tonight? Because I know a lot of people are trying to squeeze some excitement where there may not be much tonight.
Yeah, I think the NFL decided to choose violence this week, giving us a fantastic Thursday night game between the lowly Denver Broncos and the injury-riddled New Orleans Saints. And then, not to mention, going across the pond, and we decided to send London the New England Patriots and Jacksonville Jaguars. So we're off to a fantastic and hot start for some exciting Week 7 action.
Yeah, I'm nonplussed on this. We'll get into it on our Thursday night preview for sure, because I think there is still some fantasy goodness here. That's coming up in segment 2. The first segment tonight, Brandon and I are going to go around the NFL, update you on the latest injuries and the latest happenings going on that you'll need to know for your fantasy football lineups this week. We'll get into our Thursday night football preview and our FFPC Weekly Challenge. Merch is going to give us his Week 7 lineup, and we're going to go through that. And then we got some starter sits that are going to help you FFPC players out that are watching tonight as well. What is the FFPC Weekly Challenge? Well, it's fashioned after our world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge, where you are picking one player per NFL team. Obviously, not all the teams on a week, but you're filling out a 10 or a 12-player lineup, depending upon if you want to play with kickers and defenses. There's no draft. There's no salary cap. You just pick the players you want and watch them ride through the weekend. You can only pick one player per team. So in other words, if you want Spencer Rattler, you can't have Bub Means. If you want Bo Nix, you can't have Cortland Sutton or Troy Franklin. $35 or $200 to enter. You can win up to $2,500. 10, 30, and 100 team contest, classic or slim format. myffpc.com. myffpc.com is where to go. Or you could just scan the QR code that Matt Deutsch, our producer tonight, has put up on the screen, and that will take you right to the page where you can log in, register, and get some action going. There's still time for you to play in the Thursday night challenge, which will lock in about 70 minutes or so before the Thursday night kickoff goes off between the Broncos and the Saints. Tom Smith, good evening, Balky and Brandon. Are we ready for some junior college Thursday night football tonight? You know, Brandon, I see something like that, and he's probably right. And the final score of this game is probably like 37-36 in double overtime or something like that. Maybe it'll be a big treat. I don't know. I'm holding my breath. We'll see what happens for sure. So let's get into it tonight right away off the top of the bat. Amari Cooper gets traded this week. So I want to get your thoughts on him leaving Cleveland number 1. And then Sean McDermott saying that they have not made a decision on whether he's playing against the Titans this week. Obviously a much better landing spot for Cooper, but if you could go into detail on how this affects the other Bills receivers, if at all, and Dalton Kincaid, I'd love it.
Yeah, it's kind of a get out of jail free card for Amari Cooper. He gets to leave Cleveland, gets away from Deshaun Watson and that really porous passing attack that we've seen from the Browns through the first 6 weeks of the season. Moving over to Buffalo, there's obviously a lot of people were excited about this. He's sliding into a situation where they've really needed a number 1 receiver. They didn't address it in the offseason. We thought we had that with Khalil Shakir, but hasn't really kind of panned out. He's had his moments over the last few weeks, got a little bit banged up, was a tough call last week for fantasy managers in their lineups. But now Cooper takes over that kind of vacated Stephon Diggs role. I think he's going to be the guy that's going to garner most of the targets. He's going to get those first read options. Really a guy that's kind of a yards after the catch creator, something that Diggs kind of left behind when he left as well, because Cooper's an amazing route runner, just like Stephon Diggs. So once we get through this week, odds are I feel like he's not going to play this week. So I think we're going to see a normal Buffalo Bills wide receiver rotation this week, which is going to be good news for Khalil Shakir. But moving forward, once Cooper's in the lineup and we kind of have that steady dose of that normalcy with him in that lineup, I think you're going to be able to see a lot more Shakir sliding into the slot, which is going to be more really what he needs to be as opposed to moved around the formation. I think you're going to see a lot more Keon Coleman on the outside. They'll mix in, Mac Hollins here and there for running situations, but he's not really going to be a fantasy factor.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be a 3 wide receiver kind of rotation there with those guys. Some Curtis Samuel mixed in, but I think you're going to see his playing time and his usage take a dip as well. But I think this helps Dalton Kincaid. As much as we've been disappointed by Kincaid, I think a guy like Cooper that's going to take a lot of that defense as opposed to being really focused into the middle of the field, really looking at Dalton Kincaid, it's going to kind of spread the defense out a little bit more into zone coverages, more shell coverages, to where you can get Dalton Kincaid into more open spots against the defense and be able to be found, first read, second read target by Josh Allen.
And still good for Josh Allen, obviously, to get Cooper aboard too. So Cooper, Kincaid, Allen, the big winners here as Cooper goes to the Bills. And if you have him in any leagues this week, you are making, like, for instance, tonight, you would be playing Courtland Sutton over Amari Cooper this week, right?
Yeah, there's going to be a spot where you're going to have question marks like that. Courtland Sutton, even a guy like Bub Memes, he's been a guy that's been really talked about today, yesterday as well on fantasy Twitter. A lot of the questions that I've been getting myself. I think you're putting yourself in a position where, like, those are 2 names I would play tonight facing an Amari Cooper situation. Luckily, the league that I have Amari Cooper in myself, I'm in a high stakes league where I have him. I don't have to worry about facing that decision. I'll be able to kind of ride that out until the weekend,
which is great. I mean, that's what you want. That's the one thing that it does irritate me about these Thursday night games is if you have an injury issue later on in the week and your only other option is Thursday night, it kind of puts you a little bit behind the 8 ball here for sure. I want to bring up, and we'll talk about the flip side of this with the Cleveland Browns. Daniel Oyefusi, who covers the Browns for ESPN, thinks that in the next few weeks, the Browns are actually going to be more run heavy, not only because of Amari Cooper going to Buffalo, but because of the impending return of Nick Chubb. Kevin Stefanski would be essentially taking the ball out of Deshaun Watson's hands to at least make plays and just hand off the ball, which is probably not the worst idea in the world, the way that Watson is playing right now. The Browns last week against the Eagles, 6% below their expected drop back rate. And apparently Browns players told Oyefusi after the game that running the ball under the center runs that Stefanski has had success with was actually something that they really emphasized while they were getting ready to play the Eagles. I think that the thing that gets me excited here is, oh my goodness, Nick Chubb is going to fall into a great spot here where he's going to be able to get the ball right away. And Cleveland's going to focus in on the running game, and Chubb is, going to be a top 10 running back. I think I need to slow my roll here. If the Browns are going to be run centered and Chubb is still a couple of weeks away from being capital letters Nick Chubb, does Jerome Ford actually still have some extra juice in him, even if Chubb comes back against the Bengals this week?
We'll have to keep an eye on Jerome Ford and practice reports.
Mm-hmm.
Not looking too good this week for Ford. I think Chubb gets worked in slightly this week, probably looking at 7 to 9 touches, potentially working in a little bit first week back, because I know they're planning on bringing him back in. Things are really kind of lining up more for kind of a Deontay Foreman, Pierre Strong type game this week against the Bengals. Based on what I would expect to see from a game script perspective, I would probably lean more towards a Pierre Strong type game.
Interesting.
Guys going to play on third down, probably catch more passes, because odds are they're going to be playing from behind against the Bengals in that offense. But, like you mentioned, they're talking about going more run centric. That's, things I'll take for, for 400, Alex. That's just that. It feels like it's just that's a situation where they're forcing Deshaun Watson out on the field, but they know they're not getting much out of him right now. The football, he's just not playing great football. He doesn't look good on the field. He looks lost at times. They're going to have to do something and really go more towards that kind of Pittsburgh Steelers mentality type of an offense. Chubb, if all things are good with the health of that knee, obviously we're probably not going to see him look as explosive coming back from that devastating knee injury. So I'm expecting to see, they're going to try to run him in. They're not going to overwork him. They're going to use these other backs. So it's kind of a built, try to bleed him in the next few weeks. I think probably about another month away is when we're going to get a true indication of what Nick Chubb we got.
Chubb, Foreman, Ford, and Strong. All four of those guys, none of them are playable this week for you in an FFPC league?
Probably not. Like I said,
even if it's a strong, even if it's a Pierre Strong game, it's probably still not enough for you to say, oh yeah, I can flex him out this week.
It just depends. I mean, we've seen it over the last couple of weeks. We're in just devastation land from a running back perspective in fantasy football right now. You've got guys that are just clamoring to try to find somebody at an RB2 or a flex position just to fill a roster spot. So if you're in a situation, like a lot of fantasy managers were in last week, where we're picking up guys like a Tyler Goodson. A lot of people struck gold and were able to pick up Kamani Vidal or was able to pick up Sean Tucker and plug them into the lineups because of necessity. You might still be in that position this week. And for me, if I'm pulling the trigger and rolling the dice, I'm probably going to throw in Pierre Strong if I had him on my roster and I feel like I had to get a body into my lineup in the flex position.
What about, and Tom Smith points this out in the YouTube chat right now, think the Browns would make a switch at quarterback and play Winston over Watson, or is all the guaranteed money owed to Watson keeping him from being benched? Tom, nail, meathead. That is why Watson is still out there right now. Ownership would have to get involved if there's going to be any kind of quarterback change, and I think it's very, very difficult for ownership to meet with Kevin Stefanski and say, hey, this guy that you gave $250 million guaranteed, I can't work with him. I need the backup who we're not paying anything. I need him out there. That's a difficult conversation to have. And unless ownership steps in and say, okay, we acquiesce, we want Winston in there now, it's going to be Watson going forward. And if Watson has to play going forward, if you're Stefanski, probably the best way to win or at least compete at a minimum is to keep those running backs fresh, keeping them rotated, and keeping the ball out of Watson's hands on passing downs, which is kind of bad news for Judy. It's bad news for David Njoku too. I'm not seeing much of a bump, even though there should be a bump for Njoku and Judy. I'm not necessarily seeing one here, Brandon.
Yeah, no, I do like Njoku moving forward. I think you're going to see a lot of the targets generate through Njoku. We saw that last year, that late season push that he had. Obviously, a lot of it with Joe Flacco, but even with there are certain points with Deshaun Watson that Njoku, when healthy, was looked very good in that offense. For me, very, very deep league. I mentioned this on Twitter, a couple of days ago when the trade was made with Cooper. Is Cedric Tillman's a name to watch here? A lot of information that I got over the offseason. There was a couple of people that I talked to that are kind of tied in a little bit in that Cleveland area. And they even mentioned back in the offseason that Cooper, during the whole Brandon Ayuk saga situation, the plan was to trade off Amari Cooper if they could get Ayuk back in that deal. But they were very excited about what they were seeing in early camps with Cedric Tillman, and they wanted to see him on the field a little bit more and to just try to get a little bit more usage out of him. So I think he's a guy that's a very deep league stash, especially high-stakes leagues, guys that like to try to swing for the fences and be out ahead of the curve. I think a guy like Tillman is going to be somebody that you could probably put in that last roster spot on your bench.
I'd love to see a Deshaun Watson to Cedric Tillman marathon in the 3-week championship sprint that literally changes $1 million. Like it makes $1 million change hands based on that. That'd be fun to see. Likely, maybe not, but fun. Oh yeah, fun. Yeah. Nahal Najjar has been watching us on YouTube tonight. I want to get to a couple of their questions or his questions here. Bills or Broncos defense tonight? Which one are you playing in fantasy in the FFPC or wherever you're playing, Brandon? I love both these defenses. I have both these defenses in several leagues. I don't have them both on the same team, so it's difficult for me to say, but I kind of lean towards the Bills here over the Broncos. It's razor thin, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at my rankings right here in front of me for the week over on Fantasy Pros. And they're also available on RotoBaller as well. Buffalo Bills at 1, Denver Broncos at 2. I mean, you're talking razor thin. It's a coin flip between these two. I think you're looking at, they're both expected to be ahead, both facing less than stellar quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. So you're expected to see some turnovers, some sacks there. So you really go no wrong. But like you mentioned, I think I give a slight edge to the Bills. That's why I've got them at 1.
I think what kind of tips the scales for me a little bit is, one, I trust the Bills offense more. So if they do get up against Tennessee, which they should, it gives, the AJ Epinesa and all those guys the opportunity to pin their ears back and maybe get a pick six. And Will Levis loves making ridiculous plays too.
Boneheaded plays.
So you got that factor going in. And no Patrick Surtain tonight for the Broncos, which I think factors in. That's been a huge reason why Denver's defense has kept them in games this season. No Surtain tonight. Maybe it does make a difference if Bub Means is your number one receiver. But I think, as I said, both of these are fantastic. We're both leaning towards the Bills. He also writes here, Nahal Najjar does, what week is a good week to buy low on Puka Nacua? Now, Sean McVay earlier this week said Nacua is not going to practice at all this week. So he's basically been ruled out for week 7, like right after week 6 ends. We know that Jay Glazer reported late last month that Nacua was supposed to miss at least another month. So I would imagine that we're looking towards November to get him back. The sooner you buy him, the lower the price is. However, the sooner you buy him, the longer you have to make sure that you have a dedicated roster spot to Nacua. So I'm still thinking like maybe Halloween weekend is when I'd go after him a little bit more. But right now, I just think it's too far away to be buying low on him because I think it's unfair to the rest of your roster in trying to manage bye weeks and injuries with Nacua automatically taking up a dead roster spot for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. We've, reports, and all the indications I've seen were the reports they were targeting early November with the return for Puka Nacua. Everyone's still, his name value alone from last year and what he did in his rookie season is, got everybody propping him up. There's all the excitement, hoping he comes back healthy and just plugs right back into what he did last year. But the bad thing is, and that's the negative side to Puka Nacua, is outside of last year being the outlier for him, going even back into college, he was a guy that got banged up, was missing time quite a bit. So we're kind of seeing that come to fruition and come to light now in 2024 with Puka Nacua. I think what you're going to get here from a return, if you were to buy him, I would say, like you mentioned, over the next couple of weeks, probably before the end of this month, if you were that interested and you wanted to make the move to get him onto your roster, you want to do it as close to the time that he's going to return as possible, because like you mentioned as well, you're eating a roster spot for a guy that's just not going to be able to play. And as we've seen, I've mentioned previously, just the devastation of injuries we've seen over the course of the last few weeks is that there's plenty of managers right now that are just looking at their roster and their bench, and you've got 3-4 guys that are out, questionable. You just don't know what to do. And it's really playing a game of chicken with your roster to bring on another body there that you might not be able to plug into your lineups for another few weeks.
It's a tricky situation. It's a balancing act. And obviously, Nahal, your league better than we do. Your opponents better than we do. So I would just kind of flesh them out for information to just kind of see what they're offering now. And if the price is right and you can afford the roster spot, then go ahead and do it, because Puka Nacua for the remainder of the season will never be as cheap as he is to acquire at this moment in time. Yep. Speaking of cheap situations, the Las Vegas Raiders running back one. I just looked this up. Zamir White, once again, with the groin injury, is limited in practice for the second straight day. Now, he has not played in the last couple of weeks. He did practice last Friday, so it seems like he's getting closer to a return. The Rams defense is a pretty good team to come back to if you're a running back. But when you look at the situation there with Madison and Abdullah getting touches here, I'm kind of rooting for White to not play this week. So it means more touches for Madison. Madison, I think, is a kind of a sleeper running back pick for your second flex spot in FFPC teams this week. However, Brandon, if Zamir White comes back, does that knock Madison out and you got to find somebody else for your lineup?
It will to a degree. It's just another confusing running back situation, backfield situation across the NFL. We're seeing that really in a lot of spots currently, with a lot of players that are either banged up coming back or guys that have played well and kind of really causing a lot of confusion for the coaching staff. So with Zamir White, I think he's one of 2 running backs that have gotten, I think, qualifying for 50 rushes or more, that have averaged under 4 yards a carry through the first few weeks of the season, the other being Kyron Williams. But we're not looking at Kyron Williams as a guy that's disappointed, while we're looking at Zamir White as a guy that's extremely disappointing currently right now. So I don't think, even if he plays, you have to kind of temper your expectations. Coming off a groin injury, as much as Antonio Pierce has said constantly in press conferences that they just got to get him the ball more, it's not showing up on the field. When it comes down to crunch time and when they really want to kind of make a play, they're putting Alexander Mattison out there. So if you're in a pinch and you're looking for that, really low end RB2 or a flex play option, and you want to get the guy in there, I think you can get him in there. I think he's still going to be a viable option based on how the health situation is at the running back position right now.
Speaking of the Raiders, Jacoby Myers did not practice again. 2 days in a row he hasn't practiced.
Yep.
And if we look at the pass catchers outside of Brock Bowers, who was awesome last week, and that guy he's just been phenomenal so far this year. He's the guy that everybody knows the ball is going to, and yet he catches 9 of 10 targets last week for 71 yards.
Yep.
If Myers cannot go this week, Davante Adams is now a New York Jet. The guys who were catching passes for the Raiders last week, DJ Turner, Alex Balkman, not Balkman, no relation,
No.
Harrison Bryant, Christian Wilkerson, and Trey Tucker, by the way, the one guy I'd be excited about here, 2 targets, no catches.
Yeah.
I want to exploit the Raiders pass catchers here with no Adams and no Myers. I don't think I can do it. And I think this is another situation where unless his name's Brock Bowers, you're fading everybody on the Raiders.
Absolutely. I'm not touching any of these wide receivers whatsoever in Las Vegas right now. Trey Tucker, he's really kind of more of a best ball play than anything. You can't trust him in your lineup right now because you mentioned last week, 2 targets, 0 catches. Gets outplayed and outpaced by DJ Turner, who went for 4 targets and 2 catches in that game. So it's really the thing with me is Aiden O'Connell. You really can't trust anything with the quarterback situation there. More than anything, it's Brock Bowers or bust with this pass catching group. So I'm not really touching that there. So unless Jacoby Myers can get healthy and get on the field, we saw dating back to last year when O'Connell was the quarterback for the Raiders and Jacoby Myers was out there outpacing Davante Adams with O'Connell under center. They have that rapport there. I like the futures for Jacoby Myers once he's healthy. If they keep O'Connell under center now that Davante Adams is gone, it's just a matter of getting healthy, getting on the field. But outside of that, not touching any of these guys this week. There's just no chance.
The team that the Raiders play this week is the Los Angeles Rams, and big news for them as they are expected to get Cooper Kupp back this week. That's the latest we have here. In fact, I'll bring it up right now as far as the Cooper Kupp injury recovery goes. Right now, we are seeing him get in a limited practice as of 15 minutes ago. It seems like it's just individual drills that he's doing. The Rams who, by the way, already have their bye behind them, could be looking at a week 8 return. If he is back week 7, I think that's fine. You play him right away. Yep. But at the same time, we kind of got to, just in case, we got to make sure we have somebody else for Kupp, especially if he's a limited participant in practice tomorrow. How bullish are you on Kupp playing this week, Brandon?
Well, I'll say this for my Pros versus Joes roster that we did just on this channel a few months ago.
Yeah.
I need Cooper Kupp to be in there this week and get him out there to play because he's my drafted wide receiver 2 in that league. So I'm needing him to get back in that game. So, yeah, if he's a wide receiver, if he's playing this week in week 7, healthy and ready to go, you're plugging him in, no questions about it. Stafford needs that guy back. That's his security blanket. He's going to feed him targets left and right all day, twice on Sunday. So I have no qualms with Cooper Kupp right now. I'm bullish on him if he plays. Outside of that, if he does not play, you're going back to the well with Jordan Whittington and Tutu Atwell.
Yeah,
those are the 2 guys that offer the most upside. They have shown the last couple of weeks they've garnered targets. They've earned some targets in that offense. Playing against that Raiders secondary, I think there's some chances for them to be able to perform well for fantasy managers, but it all hinges on Kupp. And if he's healthy and he's in there, it's going to affect everything else is going to kind of trickle down and be affected.
The other tricky part with Kupp is it's a 4:05 game start for the Raiders and Rams. And if that's the case, if you don't have Whittington or Atwell or somebody like that, you're going to have to look to the Trey Tuckers of the world. Noah Brown for the Commanders. You think of Xavier Worthy for Kansas City, certainly Alan Lazard for the Jets, maybe. And then I don't know, man, Rashad Bateman and in Baltimore, they play Monday night.
It's a good option, though.
The
I like
Chargers,
Bateman.
yeah, and McConkey goes Monday night too for the Chargers. If Harrison can't go, and we'll talk about him a little bit later on, you have Michael Wilson, you have Greg Dortch, and you have Zay Jones, who's coming back. So you have those guys on Monday night. That's just that receiver. Obviously, there'll be some running backs there that you can weave in. But the message here is just make sure you do have somebody you can put in for Kupp in case he can't go in that late game on Sunday at 4:05. Aaron Jones said he was going to practice today. And at least as far as I can tell, I do believe he got in a limited practice today for the Vikings, which is good. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this Jones situation, initially when he got hurt 2 weeks ago, they called it a hip injury and he couldn't go back in. Then Jones was talking to the media this week and he said he felt his hamstring tighten up a little bit in warmups, but then it was good. And then when he got going in the game, it tightened up again. Precautionary measures. The Vikings pulled Jones out for the rest of the game. Jones was limited yesterday. Did not practice yesterday. Was limited today. This is a guy who had 2 separate soft tissue injuries and a joint injury last year. And if Jones gets cleared, we play him. But at the same time, I kind of hope he doesn't get cleared because that means a lot of action for Ty Chandler. And I don't want to feel like with Ty Chandler, I mean, there's no like setback possibility for an injury there, right? Whereas Aaron Jones, we'd be looking at. Now, the better boss, Matt Deutsch, brings up Cam Akers there too, who just gets traded to Minnesota this week. Now, he does know the offense, I would think. He was there last year. I don't know how effective he'd be right away. And maybe he would be. I don't know, because it's not like Chandler wowed us last week or anything like that. But Jones, if he's active, I'm playing him. If he's not active, I'm starting Chandler. Akers is a guy I'll keep on my bench, but I don't want to start him this week. How do you feel about the Vikings running back situation as far as lineups go?
Same thought process there. If Aaron Jones is going to be active and playing, you're playing him. He's going to be on RB2. Solid matchup. Now with Aiden Hutchinson gone for the Detroit Lions, it takes a little bit less pressure off of that run defense. So I like Jones this week, and I think what they're doing with him is they're kind of, this is all kind of a plan leading through the week. Don't really want to put too much on him in practice. It's a big game against the Lions. It's a divisional matchup. They're separated by a game in the win-loss column. So it's a big game for them, both teams this week. So I think they know their best offense is with Aaron Jones on the field, so they want to kind of save him up and hopefully get him right and be able to play and not really be as affected with that injury come Sunday. But if he were to not play, like you mentioned, I think Ty Chandler's going to get the bulk of the workload. Not as excited for a Ty Chandler just from an efficiency standpoint.
And from a talent standpoint.
Standpoint, too.
Jones is a more explosive player for sure.
Obviously, the explosion takes a little bit of a hit back. And then Cam Akers is essentially kind of a mirrored player to Ty Chandler as far as from an athletic standpoint, what they do from a rushing efficiency standpoint. And then they're going to sprinkle in Myles Gaskin, too, which is going to be a little bit of a headache there, too. So it's Ty Chandler. If Aaron Jones isn't playing, I'm going to get him in the lineup just from a usage standpoint alone. But like we mentioned and we let off there, if Aaron Jones is active, you're getting him in the lineup.
The Vikings, for what it's worth, they are coming off their bye. So Jones did have the extra week to rest it. Will that be enough? I don't know, but I know it's a divisional game and they really want to beat the Lions considering they're 5-0 this season. This would really put some separation between them and the division as what you were alluding to before, Brandon.
Yep.
This is an interesting one. We talked a little bit about this on the bonus HSFF hour on Tuesday with Nelson Sousa when he came on. Dallas Goedert was unable to practice Wednesday. I have not found anything about him practicing yet today. I do know that if he cannot go, Grant Calcaterra, who was the replacement tight end for him last week, didn't look all that bad and was actually had a couple of catches while on the same field with Goedert, when they're on the field at the same time, I should say. 4 catches, 67 yards on 4 targets, 30 long of 34. And, with Brown and Devonta Smith occupying a lot of attention on the perimeter, you think about Calcaterra over the middle, down the seam. This is kind of a little bit of a sharky play for those FFPC tight end premium owners. If you pick up Calcaterra, which I know he was picked up in a few leagues last night, I don't think it was for very much money. What about Calcaterra this week in against the Giants, which I mean, they have an okay defense, but Calcaterra might be in for a little sneaky start here, Brandon.
I believe so. I mean, I think he fills in right into that Dallas Goedert role. We saw last week, he earned seven targets, 4 catches in that game. I don't feel good about Dallas Goedert. You're getting a lot of kind of mixed up reports right now. They're talking about he could miss weeks, was a report that I saw yesterday. So if that's going to be the case, if you can go out and get a Calcaterra on waivers right now, like you mentioned, not really going for very much from fab budget perspectives. So you get him in there. I think from the matchup alone, it's a solid matchup this week. You can get him in there and expect another kind of a 3 to 5 catch performance from a guy like Calcaterra. Possibility, an upside of getting into the end zone, and that alone, look at a 4 to 5 catch week for a tight end. You're looking at a guy that's going to be a borderline tight end 1. So obviously a guy that you can fit in the lineup because there are a lot of question marks at the tight end position right now. That's been a lot of the talk ad nauseum throughout the first 6 weeks of the season. Is guys that are known performers have been underperforming. Guys that we don't really count on have been overperforming. It's been a toss-up each and every single week. And I think a guy like Calcaterra is a guy that you can kind of get in there and really take a chance with him in your lineup this week.
And it's fun. I mean, it's fun to start him just to see what happens, especially if he catches a touchdown early. It could be a big game for Calcaterra on Sunday. I'll tell you where there's going to be a big fantasy game for multiple people. Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Houston Texans visiting the Packers. And we got a big-time Texans fan. Or maybe the fact that I mentioned the Texans and not the Cowboys merch, this is what set the dog off, right? Like, yes. No, I'm sorry, sir. This is a Cowboys house, not a Texans house. How dare you bring up the Houston Texans tonight? That cannot happen.
I got absolutely excited for that.
All right. So we have to find a safe word for Texans. I can't say Texans anymore. Anyway, so let's talk about specifically the pass catchers. Christian Watson is what I want to lead off with here. He was limited in practice for the second straight day. He's probably going to play against Houston. 3 catches for 68 yards on 4 targets this past week. I was at that game. It was fantastic. So much fun to see. And this could be a shootout, right? And normally I've been saying on this show pretty much all through drafting season and through, the 6 weeks of the season so far, I like to stay away from the Packers. I don't like to play Packer roulette, for lack of a better term, trying to figure out, hey, is this a Watson game? Is this a Dobbs game? Is this a Wicks game? Is this a Kraft game? Which is something that you kind of have to figure out if you're a fantasy manager who owns any of those players. However, in a shootout type game like this, is it all hands on deck? Do you just play everybody on the Packers? Do you play everybody on the Texans? Because this game could, be like 31-30 or something like that. How do you feel about Christian Watson, but expand it out to the entire Packers offense this week as well?
Watson, I think, gives you consideration in a flex spot. Like you mentioned last week, gets into the end zone, is a low target game 4 for 3, 3 receptions, 68 yards. He does find the end zone, and that's what you're looking for with a Christian Watson. You're looking for a guy that's going to have that upside of getting into the end zone. He's typically been a guy that they like to target down in the red zone. But what we saw last week, obviously, is, squeaky wheel got the grease with Romeo Dobbs, is, whatever report you want to believe about him throwing a fit, not happy about his role. They get him into the end zone a couple of times last week. So outside of that, I mean, Jaden Reed's a no-brainer start. You're plugging him into your lineup every single week. He's just proving to be a guy that you can count on each and every week. Whether or not he's out there from a usage standpoint and running a lot of routes and seeing a lot of playing time doesn't really matter because he's providing efficiency when he's on the field. They try to get him in, work him in, find ways to get him the ball. Tucker Kraft's the other piece of that puzzle. The way he's played, a little bit of a down week last week, but outside of that, he's been a steady contributor for you at the tight end position. So really, for me, it's kind of odd man out between Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs. And in a shootout, I feel like there's a little bit more of a higher potential for upside for a Christian Watson with this matchup, as teams are going to be going up and down the field. It's one of the highest totals on the slate for this weekend. So the expectation is that there's going to be a lot of points on the board. And for that alone, I'm giving more of a thumbs up to Christian Watson there. I'm going to want to get him into my lineup if I have him, whether that be as my wide receiver 3 or whether that be at a first or second flex spot. I think there's there's a good chance that he finds the end zone yet again in this game this week. And let's hope, that his oddly sized hamstrings can hold up and he can get a solid game out there for fantasy managers there.
Yeah, that's the big thing, right? Get the explosive players in your lineup. This is something that when I was talking with Nelson, he kind of shifted me back around. Like, volume is okay, but if it's limited volume, or not limited volume, but if it's volume with a ceiling because of lack of athleticism or explosive play, what are we doing here? We should be wanting to get the guys, the exciting big time playmakers on the field, but with one player, with one play can make your week, and that's Watson for sure. Interesting news coming out of New England. Field Yates actually reported this earlier today from ESPN. The Patriots are traveling to London today, and Rhamondre Stevenson was not seen practicing today.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's even on the plane. I'd love to see the manifest, right, of that plane to London, see if Rhamondre Stevenson's name on there, because if it's not, it should be another big-time Antonio Gibson usage game. Now, in the game last week against Houston at Foxborough, Antonio Gibson, 13 carries, only 19 yards running. Now, he did catch 3 of his 4 targets for 24 yards, failed to get in the end zone. This was Drake May's first start. Are we ready to get hurt again by playing Antonio Gibson against the Jacksonville Jaguars in London Sunday morning if Rhamondre Stevenson's out? I think I'm going to break ties in favor of Gibson here, but I also understand there is a little bit of a risk here if you want to roll with him.
Yeah, I mean, I would be ready to get hurt again, just because I've been kind of a Antonio Gibson stan since he came out of the University of Memphis, when Rich is right down the road from where I live. So, always been a fan of Gibson. Always rooted for him to do well. And like you mentioned, it's if Stevenson's not playing, and we've talked about this leading up until this point throughout the show too, is just the injury situation with backfields across the NFL. At this point right now, a lot of fantasy managers are just grasping at straws for usage in the backfield. And if you can get a guy that is going to touch the ball 10 to 15 times, you're likely going to be playing said player in your lineup. And that's just really what it boils down to. But Gibson's not really going to provide you much from a rushing efficiency standpoint. You mentioned that with the statistics from last week's game. That's kind of been Gibson's MO throughout his career. But what he does and excels at is what you're wanting from a PPR format standpoint. That's pass catching. And I think that's going to be something that, given the situation with the Patriots, let's see how Drake May's pop-up weird little injury situation came out yesterday too. See how that unfolds. But that's kind of a rookie quarterback's best friend is a dump off over to the running back. When your read's not there right out of the gate, running back's always going to be there to get you some points there. I'm very worried about the Stevenson situation because it just kind of came out of nowhere. We thought that he was going to be trending in the right direction and play this week. Now it's not looking as such. But from a standpoint of, especially 12-team leagues in an FFPC format, you're probably in a position where you're going to have to play an Antonio Gibson just from the usage standpoint alone.
The other thing I'll point out too, and while I agree with you that a young quarterback that's learning the ropes needs to have that dump off option, May is actually pretty talented with his legs, which I think sometimes takes away from the dump offs. Now, I'm not saying that Gibson won't get any. He'll probably get a couple at a minimum, I would think. But May did have 5 carries for 38 yards last week as well. Yep. I'll answer Saint Apsky's question right now. If you're going to drop Wicks for one of those players, I would look at either Jalen Tolbert or Xavier Legette. I think I'd rather have Wicks than everybody else on that list without boring everybody else in the chat. But that's what I'd be looking at right now, Legette or Tolbert. Otherwise, I'd keep Wicks for that. And if Cole Kmet's available, if it's tight end premium, sure. If not, I don't know. I think I'd still rather keep Dontavian Wicks around. For issues like or for games when the Packers might be in a shootout, like against Houston this week, or if Reed is hurt or Watson's hurt, who are both battling something right now, different things, each of them, and Wicks could step in. Now, I know he's got the shoulder injury, but he got 2 limited practices in this week. Non-zero chance he plays on Sunday too. Now, speaking of a non-zero chance that they play on Sunday, Travis Etienne, who plays the Patriots Sunday morning, was limited again in Wednesday's practice and Thursday's practice. Doug Peterson said, I believe on Monday, or maybe it was Sunday, that he was going to be week to week with a
Yeah.
hamstring injury. Normally, week to week means you're missing at least a week. And now he could be playing this week as well. I think this is really tricky, Merch, because you have Tank Bigsby on this team, who's been very good with or without ETN. And if ETN's healthy, or I should say, if he's active, you're still running the risk of re-injury for ETN if you run him out there. And Bigsby could just take over the game, and he could be the hot hand, and he could be the guy that gets not only the rushes, but the catches and the touchdowns. Dearness Johnson, a threat to steal some touches as well. How do we handle this situation in the Jacksonville backfield on Sunday morning when it is so muddied right now?
That's the thing, is it's another situation kind of similar to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and that's, another tricky running back situation there is really led by the presumed RB1 that has underperformed this year, and that's Travis Etienne. And we've seen Tank Bigsby come in and looks exceptional when he's been on the field. He's been a very efficient running back. He's performed well in the chances that they've given him. Maybe not from the reception side and from that standpoint, but then we saw last week, Dearness Johnson come in there.
Yeah.
And he comes in and performs well too. So it's kind of it looks bad for a guy like Travis Etienne, he's not looked great throughout this year. And now you've got the situation with Doug Peterson, and it really feels like the Jaguars are just falling apart at the seams currently right now too. So for me, I can't trust ETN. Even if he were to be active and to play, I'm not sure I have enough confidence in getting him into my lineup and feeling like he's going to give me anywhere close to double-digit points. And for me, I'm going to look elsewhere probably just because of how confusing that backfield is trending to be currently. If I had a situation where I had Tank Bigsby on my roster, I'm probably playing him with pretty good amount of confidence right now. But ETN, I think it would be smart if they let him kind of sit out, let him get healthy, let them travel back over to the States and kind of reassess the situation and go from there.
That'd be nice if we get news that ETN flew back early or that he's out on Sunday morning, right? So we can because that's the thing. Like, I'm not playing Johnson this week, but Bigsby is a must play if ETN's out. And Bigsby might be a decent flex play even if ETN's active. Couple of starter sit questions here. Tom Smith wants to know about tonight, Rachaad White on Sunday or Devon Achane. Not tonight. Rachaad White. I don't know what I'm talking about. Rachaad White or Devon Achane. When you're looking at those two running backs, I think it comes down to Achane's recovery from a concussion. Seems like it was a full practice again today for the second straight day. I would expect him to be out there. Rachaad White, I don't know. He might be out there, but Sean Tucker showed off last week. They still have Bucky Irving. To me, in the backfield, it's still Achane, and I know Mostert's there too, but the most explosive player here, the more talented player is Achane. And that's what I'm going with him. Despite Tampa's offense being kind of a juggernaut right now, I'd still rather go Achane here.
Yeah, no, and I will agree with you. And Achane's kind of in that same boat with Tyreek Hill. Is just the situation with the Miami Dolphins. The team has lost a little bit of luster in the eyes of fantasy managers just because they've looked well with Tua Tagovailoa in the offense. But these last few weeks since he's been out, they've looked just utterly useless when it comes to fantasy. And then Achane gets hurt. So, but you mentioned it too. He's the more explosive player between the two. And it's really kind of comes down to simple mathematics when you look at it. Yeah, he's fully practicing. It's going to be him in the backfield with Mostert, just two options in that backfield, where Rachaad White has been wildly inefficient, now finds himself somewhat banged up in what Todd Bowles has said is going to be a three-way split in that backfield, and they're going to ride the hot hand. And who has the hottest hand in that backfield? It's certainly not Rachaad White, so I'm not going to trust him right now.
Yeah, and I think too with the whole hot hand thing. Well, who's hot right now? It's Bucky Irving. It's Sean Tucker. It's not Rachaad White. Yeah. And he would be in. I don't think he has a stranglehold on the number one job like Devon Achane has in Miami. So I'm going to go with Achane there as well. And then Tom Smith also wants to know Brock Purdy, who's at home against the Chiefs this week, or Jordan Love, who's at home against the Texans. I like Love here. I think it's a big week for him. I think Purdy's solid, but I do like Love better. Merch, what do you say?
I'm right there with you, man. I'm going to go with your hometown squad there and go with Jordan Love there. He's playing well. That offense is moving. Things are looking really good. Whereas Brock Purdy, there's been some ups and downs with that offense. Things are kind of starting to come together. They're very one-dimensional to a degree from a performance standpoint at the moment, but they're playing the Kansas City Chiefs. Odds are that's going to be a really tight game. Not a lot of points on the board I'm expecting. I think it's going to be kind of a defensive mind battle there between the two head coaches. And for me, there's just not that upside that there is with Love. You're going to see more points in the Green Bay Packers-Texans game. For me, that's just the tiebreaker in itself, is getting Love in there.
I would agree, and I think that if you play Love, you can't really. I think Love or Purdy, I think they're going to be fine. I think Love has the great game, where Purdy has the good game. Will we see a good game on Thursday Night Football tonight? Maybe, maybe not. But there are some interesting fantasy angles from this. When we come back, Brandon Murchison and I are going to break down what you're about to see tonight on Amazon Prime Video, including Cortland Sutton talk. Troy Franklin, will get into him as well. Spencer Rattler and Bo Nix, the rookie quarterbacks, dueling tonight. And of course, we'll answer all your Bub Means questions too. We're going to build an FFPC Week 7 weekly challenge lineup as well. When we come back, you're watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Brandon Murchison, Eric Balkman rolling on right after this.
We're telling ourselves happy stories about players we want to pick, less happy stories about players we don't want to pick. And part of that is being ready to abandon our own carefully crafted narratives when it's time to abandon them, right? Like, bail, this was not working, So like, we come in with super hard opinions, and sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't. The better fantasy players are the people who acknowledge quickly that, hey, this isn't working out. Doesn't mean you have to abandon a player, but it means you have to abandon the approach, and maybe you have to go with a different player. I mean, if people were playing Stephon Diggs last year down the stretch, they were only playing him because his name is Stephon Diggs. You have to be ready to acknowledge, hey, this guy's not getting the job done. I did it. Bloom and I had a big discussion about this last December, and I'm saying you can't play him right now, right? And I know that's a hard decision to make, because why? FOMO. We're going to miss out on that big game. The minute I sit this guy down, he's going to have the big game. Well, maybe. But also, while he is not having great games, there are other guys on your roster having great games. And I think that's to me, the hardest thing about fantasy is, like, when do I divorce myself from my narrative? When do I tell when do I acknowledge my happy story is not coming true? I need to figure something else out. And the people who are good at that are the people who are good at fantasy football.
Something called perpetual reloading to ensure something called a permanent championship window with FFPC Dynasty Leagues. How do we make sure that perpetual reloading is what we're doing in our rookie drafts every year to make sure that we're always competing for titles year in and year out?
Yeah, so we always have this tension between playing a little bit for the future and playing for the present. You'll have drafters jump into the startup. They'll draft the veterans. They're trying to win in that first year. Sometimes they do. I don't want to in any way, shape, or form suggest that doesn't work, because you see some of those teams compete and win titles. And yet, when we're thinking about the best way to control your chances to win, you want to be in the playoffs year after year. You want your championship window to always be open. You don't want to get to a point where you build, and then have a couple of years where you're going for it and then you're rebuilding again. You want to be in it every year. You want to get as many buys as possible so you don't have to compete in that quarterfinal round. You build a more powerful team. You can't control the injury that you have to the key player that cost you a title, or the 50-point game that a non-elite player like an Amari Cooper scores and knocks you out. You can control having one of the best teams every single season. The way that you do that is you build depth in your player talent across all those positions. You build depth in your picks. In order to execute some of those types of things, you trade down, you trade peak players, you trade young players. You've got to trade things that people want. A lot of times I think when people are trying to reload or rebuild, they're trying to trade distressed assets at a level that the rest of the group isn't interested in, and then you feel like you can't move. If you're going to make trades, you got to trade things that people want. You can also trade 2-for-1.
Welcome back to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Eric Balkman from the FFPC, High Stakes Fantasy Football at RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, being joined tonight by Brandon Murchison from RotoBaller Fantasy Pros, as well as the Woo Fantasy Podcast. Follow him on the X at Roto Superstar. It is almost time for Thursday Night Football. Saints and Broncos tonight from the Big Easy. 3-3 Denver visiting the 2-4 New Orleans Saints. Total on this is at 37 right now. The Broncos are actually a 2.5-point road favorite, and my God, why wouldn't they be with as banged up as the Saints are? We'll get to them in a second, but let's talk about Denver here, Merch. Bo Nix, a guy that has been interesting so far this season. I don't think he's been a train wreck. I don't think he's been unbelievable. I think he's been somewhere in between, which is what you'd expect from a rookie quarterback. Tonight, he faces a pretty decent New Orleans defense. And when we think about super flex leagues, will Bo Nix be able to answer the call tonight? Will he be able to keep this offense moving? Will he have a halfway decent fantasy outing where at the end of the game, we're looking at it and you're like, you know what? I'm glad I started him as my second quarterback in my super flex league. Your thoughts about Bo Nix versus this Saints defense tonight?
For me, I think it's tough to rely on him, really to feel confident in him from a Superflex perspective. He is coming off a back-to-back over 20-point fantasy games, so he's looked good the last couple of weeks, but it's kind of been an up and down thing. From an air yards perspective, 2 weeks ago, we only had 144. That's kind of what you kind of expect from a Bo Nix, is really kind of low ADOT, really kind of keeping things close to the line of scrimmage. But he utilizes his legs a little bit more last week, and that's kind of what you see with the increase of fantasy production last week in that game too. Back-to-back games with 2 touchdowns, so he's riding a little bit of a hot streak. So he's starting to get a little bit better. But I think for me, the caveat here is just the wild card of going into the Superdome and what that can kind of mean for a visiting team going into New Orleans and playing that defense, who a lot of times they do like to step it up when they're playing in a standalone primetime game at home. And I think that's what you're going to see tonight, and it's really represented by what you mentioned with the point total for tonight too, is that it's really low, not really a lot of expected fantasy production in this game. So for me, if I'm in a pinch in a Superflex format and I feel like he presents the most upside, I want to kind of really swing for the fences, sure, I might play him, but I think there's other options out there that I would feel more comfortable with than to trust in Bo Nix tonight in this matchup.
Interesting news coming out from Denver today that the Broncos have actually released running back Blake Watson, who is no longer on the team. Maybe he goes back to the practice squad. I don't know. But when it comes to the backfield tonight, we know Mike McGlinchey is probably going to be playing, which is good news for the Broncos. What do we do with the backfield? And I think this is more of a Javonte Williams question. Is the presence of Jaleel McLaughlin and now Audric Estime enough for you to break ties against Javonte Williams and sit him down against this Saints defense with a rookie quarterback running things for Denver? McLaughlin is one thing, but then when you add Estime back in the fold here, it gets a little bit more murky, Murch.
Yeah, I'm not touching this backfield right now, currently, especially with this matchup. You mentioned a tiebreaker for Javonte Williams. He's a guy that's trending in the wrong direction. So not really excited for a guy like Javonte Williams. We talked about inefficient players at the running back position. He has been a guy that's been wildly inefficient so far this year. And really going back, last week he only gets 6 rushes for 23 yards. He does give you 3 receptions. That's been something that he's been somewhat consistent in, has been providing some receptions throughout the last few weeks. So that's going to be the only kind of silver lining to Javonte Williams in this game is if he can provide a little bit more from a reception standpoint. But for me, the reason why I'm not excited and I feel like he's trending in the wrong direction is because you brought up Audric Estime. After last week's game, Sean Payton even named him by name, that said he wants to see more of Audric Estime. And I think the release of a guy like a Blake Watson, I think they're really kind of just really clear on the decks. As the season progresses, that's who I want to invest in the most would be in this backfield, would be Audric Estime. I think they want to see what they can get out of that rookie moving forward, because Sean Payton's really right now, he's grasping at someone that can really provide the most upside in this backfield, and he's not afraid to try every single running back. And Estime's been a guy that's not really gotten the touches yet, so we don't really have a formed opinion from what we've seen. There were some encouraging signs last week, and so I think that's what Payton is thinking right now. They want to kind of see a little bit more out of the rookie moving forward, and for me, I'm out on Javonte Williams.
I think this is something interesting that I'm looking at for my own leagues right now, and it's based on Jason Ortiz's question on YouTube right now. Is Courtland Sutton a good start tonight? Now, before we say, oh, no, he's not, don't play him, let's look at what Jason's facing here, and I'm facing this in some of my leagues to a different degree. But he's got Juju Smith-Schuster, who just popped up on the injury report today with a hamstring injury, which is never good. midweek injury report additions. Michael Pittman obviously does not have the greatest matchup, and he might have Anthony Richardson thrown to him, not Joe Flacco. So there's that too. We already talked about Rhamondre Stevenson maybe not playing. And then Amari Cooper, we don't know if he's playing this week, and maybe we're trying to find ways to bench Cooper based on our conversation to lead off the show tonight. He doesn't want to risk it all for Sunday. Yeah, I think in this case, you may want to start thinking about flexing out Sutton before lineups lock here in the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, because here's the thing is you mentioned, for me, Juju's the one glaring thing here is if he's healthy, he does pop up on the injury report today, but if he's healthy, I'm playing him no brainer when it comes to Juju, because he's kind of filled into that Rashee Rice role in the Chiefs offense, provides the most upside out of the guys that he currently has based on their situations that we have currently here on Thursday night. But what you have with Sutton, you've got a guy that's just, he's a floor play. He's not going to be a guy that's really going to give you that upside and that, 20-point fantasy performance. He's going to give you a guy that's going to give you that 10 to 14 point range because he's been a consistent, steady hand from a target perspective, reception standpoint. He's kind of always been 50, 60 yards and kind of sprinkles in. He's got 2 touchdowns over the last 3 games. So it's an encouraging thing with Sutton. If I feel like I wanted to go ahead and get a guy that's going to give me a steady, consistent amount of points in my fantasy lineup and not risk it, I'm playing Sutton. But if I want to wait and I want to have a guy that's going to give me the upside, I'm going to wait the Juju Smith-Schuster situation out.
I think, and me wanting to play for upside, I will probably try to sit Sutton. However, Jason, in your scenario tonight, if those are your options, then yeah, I think Sutton might be a better play tonight. But it depends what type of fantasy player you are, as Merch just pointed out. How risk adverse are you? Let's talk about Troy Franklin here real quick. A guy that nobody's starting this week, but is he rosterable in 20-man roster, 12-team leagues in the FFPC? This is a player that has caught no more than 2 passes in any one game. He has not cracked 40 yards on the season. However, last week against the Chargers, he did get in the end zone. Would you be utilizing a roster spot in the FFPC on Troy Franklin, Brandon?
For me, I'm not. I'm kind of still steering clear of Troy Franklin because of the situation in that rotation with the wide receivers there, because it's really been so far more or less been Cortland Sutton and has been Devon Vele. So far, those have been kind of your top 2 options, with Josh Reynolds sprinkling in. He's currently 3rd on the team with 13% of the targets on the season, while Troy Franklin 4th in that rotation at 10%, really closely tied in with Lil Jordan Humphrey there as well. Yeah. So it's kind of a situation where in the leagues that I'm in a lot of those, 12-team, 20-round, 20 roster spot leagues myself. He's really not rostered in any of the leagues that I'm in currently with those formats. So I think it's a situation where you want to kind of play them a little bit more of a wait and see how things start to develop over the next few weeks. He might be a guy that could be a roster pickup for you, kind of last roster spot for you to kind of stash and see how things play out over the next few weeks. If you have a flexibility with your roster that you could do so, because we see that a lot, Sunday mornings, a lot of teams are kind of roster churning and picking up a guy to put on the bench just to see how things play out for that day. Troy Franklin falls into that kind of a mold. I'm not really kind of counting on anything with him right now. I want to see how the next 2 to 3 weeks go and see how he might mix into that wide receiver rotation.
Definitely a hold for me in Dynasty, but yeah, I'm not looking for redraft. I have very little interest in, especially as much as I like to hoard backup running backs merch.
Yes.
I am all about that rather than Troy Franklin at the end of my roster. Let's flip the side of the field and talk about the New Orleans Saints. Last week, Spencer Rattler in his debut, 22 of 40, 243 yards, touchdown, and 2 picks. He also did take 5 sacks, 27 yards rushing on the night too. So that was good, or on the day, I should say. And you say, well, Balky, he only threw all that crazy yardage because they lost 51-27. They were trying to come back. Well, remember, they were up 27-24 at halftime. At the end of the third quarter, they were only down 31-27. It was just a cavalcade of action for the Buccaneers in that fourth quarter. So Rattler still did put up numbers, pretty good numbers for a debut. Is he going to do it again tonight against Denver? And I look at this from, a super flex standpoint. Spencer Rattler, how much fantasy value, if any, is there for you tonight, Merch?
None for me there. Yeah, even with the trailing game script and kind of how he performed last week, he still only finished as QB 20 on the week last week. So it's kind of that feels like that might have been kind of his high point as far as the fantasy production standpoint is looking currently. Now you get a step up in competition from a defensive standpoint too. You're not expecting to see the team get the doors blown off of them like they did last week. You mentioned with the 51 points put on the board by the Buccaneers. So I don't think you're going to see as much of a negative game script here. I think you're going to see more of a kind of a closely tight-knit contest. I think you're going to see the Saints really try to hone in on more of the ground attack this week. We're expecting to see, oddly enough, Dennis Allen's favorite football player back on the field tonight with Kendre Miller. He's supposed to be active and then ready to go too. So I think you're going to see a little bit more of the running game tonight. Try to control the clock, take the ball out of Rattler's hands, where he doesn't feel like he has to force anything and make a play. I think they're going to really kind of control the game a little bit more from an offensive standpoint. So there's not a lot of upside for me. Don't have a lot of trust with Spencer Rattler tonight in this ball game here.
You mentioned the backup running back, and I wanted to ask you, if you only have one available spot on your roster for the backup to Alvin Kamara on your team, if anything were to happen to Kamara, who would we deploy? Who would we be keeping on our roster? Is it Kendre Miller or is it Jamal Williams? Clearly, Dennis Allen likes Jamal Williams more than he likes Kendre Miller, but I think a lot of us are of the opinion that Kendre Miller is younger. He's got the juice. That's who we want. I've been keeping more Kendre Miller in my teams. I don't think I have Jamal Williams anywhere. I probably have Kendre Miller on the 3 or 4. Your thoughts on the backup running back situation and how we treat it for fantasy?
I'll agree with that. I mean, you even saw it last year. Those last couple of games towards the end of the year, they really wanted to get Kendre Miller out there and see what they got in him. I think Dennis Allen's just, we saw a lot of frustration with him during the offseason because of Kendre Miller and the injury situation. He wants the guy to be healthy so he can utilize him. And I think that's a situation where fresh legs, young player, Jamal Williams is, it's Jamal Williams. You're looking at a guy that's going to get you 3.5 yards a carry on minimal attempts. There's just not a lot of upside there. So Kendre Miller, if anything were to happen to Alvin Kamara, presents the most upside there and has the better chance to be a viable fantasy commodity that you can plug into your lineup. So I'm with you there. I would stash him if I had that last open roster spot.
As fun as exciting it would be to maybe utilize our last roster spot on our teams for Bub Means, it's difficult for me to sell him as even a second flex tonight, unless you own a ton of Bears and Cowboys where you just need a warm body in there. Then yeah, maybe. But Bub Means, I can't really sell myself on him as trying to flex him in tonight. I know there's no other Saints wide receiver I want. What about Bub Means tonight? Let's talk about him.
He is a desperation play for me. I can't tell you how many questions that I have had on Bub Memes so far throughout the day today. A lot of people asking him about getting. I need to get him into my lineup. I've got injury situations out there. We mentioned earlier too with one of the other questions. You'll have people out there with an Amari Cooper situation. What do I do there? He might not play. So you've got guys like that. I mean, I picked up Bub Memes in a couple of waivers that have ran this week, but I picked him up from more of a wait and see perspective. Now we have the situation that has really kind of played itself out where Rashid Shaheed, he's gone, done for the year. He's out. Chris Olave obviously is not playing tonight too. So for tonight, it's kind of a situation similar to a Cortland Sutton. And I've had that question come up a couple of times. I'm looking at Cortland Sutton tonight, Bub Memes, who would you play? And I think it kind of comes down to what we were just talking about a few minutes ago with the Juju and Cortland Sutton situation. Do I want the floor play or do I want the possibility of an upside play?
Yeah.
Upside play, I think, is going to be Bub Memes. He's the number one target in that pass catching group now in tonight's game. A little bit of a rapport that we saw last week with Spencer Rattler. So I think that time with them, second and third string during all the rookie camps, offseason training programs.
Scout team,
Got a lot of scout team preparation. There's some rapport there. So I think you're going to see Means be a guy that you could rely on if you're really kind of looking at getting a guy in the lineup. Like we mentioned, if you don't want to take a risk with some of these players that are questionable right now and you want somebody in your lineup, plug him in. I don't have any qualms about getting him into your lineup as a flex, just because I think the usage is going to be there, similar to Cortland Sutton. I think those guys are kind of on the same plane.
Another fringe guy for the FFPC tonight, tight end premium format, is Juwan Johnson. He gets 3 targets last week. He catches all of them from Spencer Rattler. He gets 48 yards. I look at where he is in a lot of pundits' rankings, and you can definitely let me know where you have Juwan Johnson ranked at tight end tonight. But I think he's still kind of in that borderline area as a second flex. Again, tight end premium scoring in the FFPC only, but this is a guy that we need to consider tonight as well.
I agree with you. Tight end premium, second flex position. Juwan Johnson has definitely some appeal tonight. I've got him at tight end 18 coming into this week. Kind of in that same mold with Pat Fryermuth, K. Dot, and Colby Parkinson, kind of in that range of type of player. Taysom Hill's not playing tonight. We just talked about Bub Means being the only game in town at the receiver position, technically. Who knew that Cedric Wilson was still in the NFL? Raise your hands. He's playing for the New Orleans Saints. So he's another name out there as well. So, but for me, you saw an uptick in usage last week with Juwan Johnson. I think there's a chance that he's going to get utilized if they get down in that red zone area. Big body type of receiver right there that gives you kind of a wide frame to target from a rookie quarterback standpoint. And that viewing, guy gets out in the middle of the field, broad shoulders, hit him right there when he turns around in the zone. I think there's a good chance that he can get you playable fantasy production, like you mentioned, second flex and a tight end premium in FFPC.
I don't know about you. I'm all of a sudden excited to watch this game tonight. There is the possibility of some big plays. Johnson and Sutton and Kamara, obviously, who we didn't talk about at all because everybody's starting Alvin Kamara tonight. The other thing I'll bring up real quick in case I still have this up, Greg Dulcich, a healthy scratch tonight at tight end for Denver. Nobody's playing Lucas Krull, but if you have Dulcich on any dynasty teams at this point in the FFPC, you can probably let him go and chase somebody else. One more start sit. I'm going to get out of the way here right now. Sammy Gulko on YouTube has been very patient. Can only play David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, or James Conner. We have to bench 2 of those players and only start one between Montgomery, who's against the Vikings in Minneapolis, Josh Jacobs, who's at home against the Texans, and James Conner, who's at home against the Chargers. It's very, very close for me, and maybe this is the Packer in me talking, but I think Jacobs is the guy I want to play here, Merch.
I definitely agree with you based on my rankings that I'm looking at right now. I have Josh Jacobs ahead, slightly ahead of David Montgomery, who is also ahead of then James Conner. I've got David Montgomery as a RB2 ranked right now just because of the matchup on the road. Minnesota's defense is a little bit tough right now. We have seen that through the first few games of the season so far, whereas Josh Jacobs at home in that matchup against the Houston Texans defense has been able to kind of be gettable to opposing running backs this year. So for me, that's kind of the tiebreaker there. And it's also the usage standpoint. Jacobs is the guy that's going to get utilized the most in the backfield. Connor coming off kind of a down game himself in kind of a tougher matchup in his own right. So, tiebreaker goes to Josh Jacobs for me there.
We did see, if I remember correctly, last week, we did see some Trey Benson, 5 carries, 26 yards, nothing in the passing game, but maybe this is a way that Arizona can look to keep James Conner fresh all season long too. We've seen Emmanuel Wilson work himself into Green Bay and their attack, but it's still been a Josh Jacobs led offense. And obviously we know David Montgomery shares a backfield with first-round pick Jahmyr Gibbs. So there's that too. So, I think, listen, we could be wrong about this. This is tough. And chances are, you're probably going to get this wrong. You got a 1 in 3 chance of getting it right. We both like Jacobs. So good luck with that, Sammy Gulko. We appreciate you watching tonight. Okay, Merch, let's get into your FFPC Weekly Challenge Week 7 lineup. for everybody who is wondering what it is. The FFPC Weekly Challenge is a weekly challenge offered at myffpc.com, myffpc.com. You can submit a 10-player lineup or a 12-player lineup if you want to play with kickers and defenses. Only one player per NFL team. So no stacking in this competition. You are going to pick 10 players from 10 different teams or 12 from 12 different teams. Enter for as little as $35. Win as much as $2,500, 10, 30, and 100 team contests. You can play over at myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Merch, you have been good enough to submit a lineup for the show tonight. I want to get into it. Is this the 10-player version, or is this a 12-player version?
I have selected 10 roster spots
Perfect.
for my challenge lineup here.
Okay. Well, you lead the way, man. Where are we starting with this lineup tonight?
Right out of the gate at the quarterback position, I'm going to go with the guy that's really been kind of the man to go with in your weekly lineups throughout the first few weeks of the season. That's Lamar Jackson.
Yep.
I'm going to go with the main stud. He's averaging 19. He's going up against a defense this week in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're giving up 19.9 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. And they've also allowed the most rushing touchdowns to the position this year too, which is kind of the key here for Lamar Jackson, who, let's be honest, is the rushing quarterback king. So for that alone, I'm leaning towards Lamar Jackson at the quarterback position this week.
And it's going to be such a fun game Monday night, Ravens and Buccaneers. That game too, when we look at it, you could have easily gone with Derrick Henry. Ravens a minus 3.5. They're a 3.5 point favorite in that game too. So it's a positive game script there. But when you get that stat about how much the Buccaneers are giving up rushing wise to the quarterback, I think it makes it an easier decision to say, hey, Derrick Henry, maybe next week. Lamar Jackson is our guy that we're going with at the signal caller this week. Okay, Lamar Jackson is our quarterback. Where are we off to next?
At the first running back position, I'm going to go with a guy that we've kind of previously touched on, and that's Kyren Williams. Kind of talked about him from a low efficiency standpoint from his yards per carry this year, but he's also lined with a great matchup at home against the Las Vegas Raiders this week, who have been giving up an average 26.34 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs.
That is a lot.
That's pretty good bit of business there. So I like that for Kyren Williams. I think they're going to come back. They're coming back from the bye. I think he's going to see a heavily utilized workload this week. Kyren Williams gets in for 1, possibly 2 touchdowns in this matchup this week is what I'm feeling.
Yeah, one of the other great things about that is I don't think anybody's thinking about playing Matthew Stafford in this lineup because you want to be elite everywhere. And the only other pivot for the Rams is certainly you're not going to take Blake Corum. There's no threat at tight end, and the only threat at receiver here would be Cooper Kupp. And we don't know if he's going to even be playing this week. So Kyren Williams, maybe a little bit of a chalky play, but you do need some chalk in these lineups. And Kyren Williams is a great pick here. Definitely high upside, not only for what he's meant for the Rams offense this year, but to your point, a guy who can really have his talents exploited against this Raiders defense, a guy who has a really good matchup in a really good situation. I'm on board with Kyren Williams. Who's our second running back, Merch?
Second running back, I'm going to go with a guy that's coming back from an injury, full practice today, guy that's provided a lot of points for fantasy managers early on this season. That's Brian Robinson from the Washington Commanders. His matchup this week, also very juicy. He is at home playing against the Carolina Panthers defense that has allowed the most yards to the running back on the ground this year and have given up 12 rushing touchdowns up until this point too as well. So Brian Robinson Jr., come on down and score me some points this week coming back off of the missed game the missed second half. He played the first half, took him out the second half. I think fully healthy, comes back in this week, good to go. I think I like Brian Robinson Jr. this week.
This has been a multi-week injury for Brian Robinson that he has been trying to play through. And this is a good get-right game for him. He is the lead guy in that backfield. Not the most talented guy in the world, but certainly talented enough to chew up yardage against a pretty bad Carolina Panthers defense. I think when you look at the other Commanders we could have taken, we're not taking Jaden Daniels because we already have Lamar Jackson at quarterback. Terry McLaurin would have been a possibility, but to your point, I mean, this is a situation where this is a positive game script for Robinson, for Ekeler, maybe even for Jeremy McNichols in the fourth quarter, for God's sake. But yeah, I mean, Robinson, this is the type of guy that could score 2 touchdowns in the first quarter, have, close to 100 rushing yards by halftime. We'll take that, even if he's lifted a little bit late in the game. Matchup too good to pass up. Brian Robinson, not exactly the most elite running back out there too. So this might be another player that is kind of faded by a lot of other people. I like it. I like Brian Robinson.
Separates you. Yeah, it gives you a little bit of difference from the rest of the lineups that might be out there as well. So next up on the list, going to the wide receiver position, going to go with an alpha, and I'm going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown. That division matchup against the Minnesota Vikings this week. He's even mentioned, talking in a kind of a little bit of a press conference that he had, or a report that was out there. I think it was yesterday. They were asking him his thoughts on Justin Jefferson. He was talking about how they're friends. He said, but this week they're not friends. He's out there to outperform him. He wants to show that he's the best wide receiver in the league. And I think that's going to be a situation that he can do so in this matchup. Coming off a game against the Cowboys, just 4 receptions, but he did get into the end zone late in that game. But outside of that, you're looking at a guy that's always going to be a steady contributor to you from a reception standpoint. Yardage has been fairly steady this year, but he's scored in 3 straight games. He's got 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games. I think that touchdown equity alone I'm going to buy into, and I'm definitely going to plug him in the lineup this week based on that.
I had to look it up to see, because I know Amon-Ra St. Brown has all the receivers in his mind memorized that were drafted before him, and I had to check if Jefferson or Addison was one of those, and they were not. So there's no extra juice for St. Brown this week, just the normal amount of juice. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the highest totals of the week. The Lions and Vikings currently have their total set at 50.5. The Vikings are 1.5 point favorites, so game script here should be neutral. It's going to be the best players making the best plays. And I love the idea of St. Brown being featured in this passing game. Laporta only caught 1 pass last week. Jamison Williams has been relatively quiet recently. This could be a big time game for St. Brown, and maybe one that I think Nelson brought this up on Tuesday, that the last time these two teams played, Christmas Eve or the day before Christmas Eve last year, both Jefferson and St. Brown went crazy. And I think St. Brown had double-digit catches. I see no reason why that wouldn't happen again. So St. Brown, as far as our alpha receiver here goes, chef's kiss. This is a good pick here, Brandon.
And then next wide receiver, the wide receiver 2, I'm going to go back to another high-scoring game that we've kind of touched on already, and I'm going to the other side of the ball for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we're going to go with Chris Godwin. Coming off a monster game, 11 receptions last week, 13 targets, gets in the end zone twice. Another great matchup this week. Baltimore secondary is not very good. We have seen that kind of play out throughout the season this year. And now you also have the added, incentive too of Mike Evans and his injury situation that has popped up. I believe he missed practice today.
Yep.
And with that kind of factored in, we'll see how his practice might come about on Friday. But if he were to miss the game, man, just chef's kiss. Chris Godwin getting in there for another double-digit reception game, 1 to 2 touchdowns in a back-and-forth high-scoring affair.
Godwin's one of the guys. He was one of my most heavily targeted players during drafting season. He's done nothing but doing nothing but awesome games so far this season. 43 catches, 511 yards. He's already gotten in the end zone 5 times. From the slot this year, where he's primarily playing, he's already getting about 12 yards per catch on the season. This is another, we don't think of Chris Godwin as a high upside guy, but he's not only a high upside guy, he's an extremely high floor guy right now too. So Godwin in this game on Monday night, again, one of the higher totals of the week with the Ravens, and a game that the Buccaneers are home dogs in. Sure, fire up Godwin.
Yes. Now we're going to go to tight end position this week, and it's been one. Tight end, we talked about it earlier, has just really been kind of a toss-up throughout most of the season. But I want to go with a guy that's been one of the more consistent options this year. One of the guys top of the food chain at tight end right now, and it's the rookie. It's Brock Bowers.
Yep.
Got a matchup that he's going to Los Angeles to play the Rams. This defense has given up 14.9 fantasy points per game to the tight end position, which is second worst in the league right now. And now you do have Davante Adams out of Las Vegas. All the passing is going to go through Brock Bowers. We have seen that ad nauseum, coming off back-to-back double-digit target games, 17 catches the last 2 weeks, gotten into the end zone once over the last 2 games. I think we're going to see somewhat similar to that this week. Another double-digit target game, close to 100 yards and a touchdown for Brock Bowers is what I'm expecting.
You have an underwhelming quarterback situation. You have a more than underwhelming offense there. And yet Brock Bowers, a rookie, is still not only the best threat on the team to move the ball down the field, but the other team knows that, and they still couldn't stop him last week. When everything seems to be working against Bowers, he still comes through again and again. 9 catches on 10 targets last week, over 71 yards. FFPC tight end premium scoring. All that he was missing last week was a touchdown. Maybe he gets it this week. Good matchup, good role in the offense, good choice at tight end, Merch.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to go to one of the 4 flex spots.
Here we go.
And we're going to start out with one of the running backs. I've got 2 running backs that I'm going to plug into the flex. And the first is going to be Mr. Injury prone himself, but has looked good throughout the first parts of the season. That's J.K. Dobbins. Coming into the flex this week, got him as a guy that's going to be ranked as he's RB7 on the week for me coming into this week.
Wow.
But from fantasy points per game, he's number 12 on the year, 15.8. No Gus Edwards. Solid matchup here against the Arizona Cardinals on the road. But the defense there with Arizona, they've given up 24.72 fantasy points per game to the position. 749 yards on the ground, which is one of the highest totals as well from rushing yards. So I think you're going to see a big game from J.K. Dobbins. Going to look probably in that neighborhood of 16 to 19 rushes on the ground. That alone, the utilization is going to get him around 100 total yards in this game with a possibility of getting into the end zone.
I would have liked to see more action in the passing game from him last week for J.K. Dobbins. He catches both his targets, but it was for only 10 yards, 6 yards, not even.
Yeah.
So in regards to Dobbins, the number that I love last week is not the 96 for the rushing yards. It's not the 1 for the touchdown. It's the 25 carries. You throw that in with the 2 catches he had. That's 27 touches for Dobbins. As you pointed out, Gus Edwards on IR. Kamani Vidal was relegated for true backup duty. He did get that touchdown late for what it's worth. However, if Dobbins is touching the ball 27 times, we know Jim Harbaugh loves to run the ball, and it seems like he wants a workhorse here in Dobbins. This is a guy that's been underrated for most of the season, and he's got a really good matchup. I don't like the Arizona defense at all from a real life or a fantasy perspective. We saw what Jacobs and Love were able to do to it last week. I think Dobbins continues that this week. I actually kind of like the Chargers in general this week, but for sure, their biggest playmaker so far this season has been J.K. Dobbins, so it continues here. He is our 3rd running back and our number 1 flex. Who is our 2nd flex, Brandon?
Second flex, second running back. Going to go with another unheralded running back who's performed well and is the RB11 right now in fantasy points per game on the year with 16.0 fantasy points per game. That's Chuba Hubbard. Getting a game again, going back to that Washington-Carolina game. Washington giving up plenty on the ground, 23.15 fantasy points per game to the running back. Not far behind the Arizona Cardinals in terms of rushing yards allowed on the year, 715. So there's a chance we're going to see heavy usage out of Hubbard in this game as well. Weighted opportunities, targets. He's 4th in targets on the year, 24. And then rushing yards, he's 3rd in the league right now with 485. So he's definitely a guy that's giving you a lot of utilization. He's been efficient with his touches. And we talked about hot hand situation with these running back backfields earlier. Riding the hot hand with Chuba Hubbard while he's still getting a lot of usage.
And I think this is why it's important to understand not only the team, but the player themselves. Carolina's 1-5 on the year. You would think that the running game can't get going there. This is Deontay Johnson. This is Xavier Legette. This is Andy Dalton, Jatavian Sanders. Hubbard is 3rd in the league in rushing right now. Number 3. This is what should be reserved for the teams that are winning all these games. And yet it's Hubbard that has been up there in 3rd. Last week, 18 carries, 92 yards. He also gets 5 catches for 11 yards. This is a game they lost by 3 touchdowns, and yet Hubbard was still heavily involved. So I love this pick. I love this player this year. He is running hard. He's running aggressive. He's running for a contract, remember, because I don't know how much he figures in their long-term plans with the addition of Jonathan Brooks. Use him while we can, and we will here. Chuba Hubbard, say what you will about the Panthers. Hubbard's been performing, and the Commanders, who is their opponent this week, they give up a lot of rushing yardage too. And you mentioned the fantasy points to opposing running backs. I love it. Great call. Hubbard and Dobbins as our first 2 flexes. Please keep going, sir.
And here we go. Last 2 flexes. The first of the 2 I'm going to go to the wide receiver position. I'm going to go to the great state of Wisconsin there with Mr. Balky. We're going to go with Jaden Reed. And we're going to plug him in this week. Been very, very effective. I've got him coming into the week, wide receiver 8 with this matchup. He's fantasy points per game, 17.7 on the year, which is wide receiver 6. He's been very effective, plays out of the slot quite a bit, been heavily utilized. He's number 1 in target quality rating on the year as well, and number 4 catchable target rate. So he's been great with the balls that have come his way and gets us another solid matchup. We talked about it earlier. This is one of the higher totals on the board. We're expecting to see a lot of points in this game, a lot of back and forth here. And I think Jaden Reed's going to really kind of take advantage of the matchup this week at home against the Texans.
Speaking of back and forth, it's been back-to-back punts to open up the game. Denver punts and now New Orleans punts back. I believe Amazon has gone to commercial. No score there, 10.5 minutes to go in the first quarter. Jaden Reed, I would say a slightly minor injury risk here this week. I still think he's going to play through it. He's been playing through it. One of the things I've noticed about Reed this season is I don't want to say they run the offense through him, but they set up whatever play they're going to do with a lot of Jaden Reed stuff. They're moving him all over the field. They're putting him in motion. He's constantly a decoy for the plays that he's not involved in, and he's just a great football player. He makes football plays. Not the most athletic guy in the world, was never heralded for any combine prowess or anything like that. But this guy is just a great, high character, good football player. And he's the reason, a big part, not the only reason, but he's a big part of why this Packers offense is so good. It's a matter of time before he cranks out, a 10 catch for 3 touchdown and 180-yard game, maybe combined, because they use him in the ground game too. Like he's getting the ball, rushing the football as well too. So Jaden Reed here, fantastic pick. Quite frankly, I don't want to say he's matchup proof, but could be a shootout type game. I love it. Jaden Reed for sure. Last player on our roster here, Merch.
And I guess I wanted to save one of the best for last here. And we're going to go with a guy coming back from his bye week. Great matchup at home here. And we're going to go with another wide receiver. And we're going to go with the man himself, Mr. Justin Jefferson. Coming back off the bye, 19.0 fantasy points per game, which is wide receiver 5 currently in the league. A great matchup, like I mentioned, at home against the Detroit Lions, who, as a group against wide receivers, give up 43.02 fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, giving up 4th in the league with receiving yardage, 1,056. You mentioned a minute ago, we were talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown, that matchup last year where both were just going back and forth. It's really what kind of led me into this thought process here is I think you're going to see oh yeah, watch me do this. Okay, you did that. Watch me do this between these 2 wide receivers in this game. So I think we're going to see a lot of back and forth just between the 2 of them. Great upside. Justin Jefferson, obviously top 5 type of player here.
That game between the Vikings and Lions, unfortunately, is a 1:00 kickoff, which I would love to see it in the late window because it's going to be boffo with the offenses in that game. There's actually a lot of good football games this week. I mean, I don't want to downplay it, but the Chiefs and Niners, that's going to be great in the late window on Sunday as well. Obviously, we've mentioned Packers and Texans too. Getting back to this Jefferson St. Brown matchup, you have the opportunity here with this type of lineup. If both of those guys go crazy again, you're going to have both of them on the same roster, and this could be huge, especially when you couple it with some sleepers at running back, Brian Robinson, J.K. Dobbins, and Chuba Hubbard. And then if Reed gets in the end zone, Bauer should be huge, and Lamar Jackson's the premier quarterback choice. I love this lineup here. Once again, Brandon Murchison's 2024 Week 7 FFPC Weekly Challenge lineup. Lamar Jackson at quarterback. The running backs are Kyron Williams, Brian Robinson, J.K. Dobbins, and Chuba Hubbard. The receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Godwin, Jaden Reed and Justin Jefferson, and we're rolling with Brock Bowers at a tight end spot. Now, you can enter this lineup if you want by scanning that QR code right on your screen and entering the FFPC Weekly Challenge. Enter for as little as $35, win up to $2,500. Brandon Murchison has just given you the keys to the mint, we hope, at least for this week in the Week 7 Weekly Challenge. Enter now over at myffpc.com, myffpc.com, or simply scan the QR code on your screen. We're going to be back in a couple of minutes with some starts and sits that are facing a lot of FFPC players this week, including but not limited to Justice Hill, Khalil Shakir, Theo Johnson, Drake May, and much more. You're watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Brandon Murchison and Eric Balkman right here on the Better Sports Network.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, and they let him be the quarterback for a long time, too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. I there's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl. And when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, yeah, well, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing, too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would.
But Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game that they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman, and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, like, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky, is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
It is a Will Lutz field goal that has separated the Broncos and Saints so far. 5.5 minutes to go in the first quarter. 46 yards from Will Lutz is good. And now the Broncos lead the Saints 3-0 on Thursday Night Football. Amazon is, I believe, going to a commercial right now. So we've got you covered here for all the fantasy football analysis you could ever imagine. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Brandon Murchison from RotoBaller and Fantasy Pros and the Woo Fantasy Podcast joining me tonight. This is going to be a good time for you to consult your rankings, I think, with all these start-sit questions that I'm going to fire at you, Brandon. We'll start off with running backs here. We mentioned before the break, Brian Robinson is on the weekly challenge team for you this week. But what about Austin Ekeler against those Carolina Panthers, or Bucky Irving, who is going to be going against the Baltimore Ravens on Monday Night Football, not knowing the status of Rachaad White just quite yet? Ekeler or Irving?
I've actually got Ekeler ranked slightly ahead of Bucky Irving this week, and that's even if Rachaad White were to miss the game. I'm kind of factoring that into the thought process here. Ekeler's been one of the more efficient running backs in the league this year, and even with splitting time with Brian Robinson in that backfield for the Commanders, like the matchup better here for Ekeler. even with, Brian Robinson getting a majority of kind of the workload there, Ekeler mixing in, getting those highly touted red zone touches is kind of a mix in here with the thought process. Bucky Irving against that Baltimore Ravens rush defense, which is one of the best ones in the league currently this year, is really the tiebreaker for me. I think there's a little more upside with Ekeler, so I would go Ekeler over Bucky Irving.
You just don't know what Sean Tucker's capable of after this
Sure.
this last week blowout. How involved is he going to be? At least we know what Brian Robinson does for this offense. Ekeler, 13 touches last week for a combined 68 yards, including 4 catches on the week too. So Ekeler is the pick over Bucky Irving here. Here's a fun one. They're playing each other this week too. It works if Nick Chubb is active. Obviously, if he's not active, you're playing Zach Moss. But when you look at these two teams and heading in maybe different directions, maybe not, but Chubb maybe making his season debut, would you play him over Zach Moss, who is taking on the Cleveland Browns?
Not ready to do that just yet. Still going to play Zach Moss, even with Chase Brown kind of starting to take some reins into that backfield and getting the increased usage week in, week out. First game back, like you mentioned with Nick Chubb there, I've got him as a kind of a wait-and-see mode type player. I want to see it on the field first before I can trust him and put him into my lineup, even though the matchup's good this week for Nick Chubb. If he were heavy usage, normal Nick Chubb that we're used to seeing, I just don't expect to see a full workload there. Like I said, I mentioned it earlier, I think you're going to see kind of like 7 to 9 touches for Nick Chubb this week as they slowly start to mix him in, where I think I trust a little bit more from Zach Moss in the usage that we've seen from him throughout the season so far. Not great for either, not really counting on a lot for either player here, but I think Moss presents more expected usage here in the backfield.
You wonder how many positive game scripts Nick Chubb will be in for not only this week, but the remainder of the season. The Browns 5.5-point home underdogs to the Cincinnati Bengals this week. Zach Moss in comparison to Chase Brown last week. Zach
got them mixed up, both guys.
Yeah. Chase Moss and Zach Brown. No. So Chase Brown ended up getting 12 touches last week. Zach Moss got 7. So he was behind, but not all that much. And quite frankly, that was a weird game on Sunday Night Football. 17-7 final score in the Meadowlands. I don't know what we can make of it. And we're talking about a 5-touch difference here. So yeah, I'm on board with Moss over Chubb. I just, you hate to roll Chubb out there and then have him just play, 10 or 15 snaps. And then that's it. Final running back one this week. And it's a battle of the backups here in, bye week hell, injury hell. If you have to play Justice Hill or Raheem Mostert this week, who are you rolling with? Justice Hill, a guy who, man, he's had some really good games so far this season. And if Derrick Henry were to ever go down, I think Justice Hill is a slam dunk top 20 running back. And then you have Raheem Mostert, who has been battling injury. He comes back this game coming off the bye week to a backfield that's still led by Devon Achane, but a very exploitable matchup in the Colts here. Who you got, Justice Hill or Raheem Mostert?
I have currently Raheem Mostert ranked 2 spots ahead of Justice Hill in my weekly rankings. Justice Hill coming off of kind of really 2 back-to-back really down games.
After
a RB2 finish from week 4 against the Buffalo Bills. He's really kind of provided nothing for fantasy managers the last 2 weeks, and that's kind of what you're expecting to see. Unless they're in a trailing game script, we talk about that a lot with running backs, especially. Game script is really kind of the key here, and if you think that the Ravens are going to be trailing the Buccaneers by a lot, then Justice Hill's a guy you want to get in your lineup as he's playing from behind, catching passes out of the backfield. I just don't expect to see that to happen in this matchup. Whereas Raheem Mostert, we saw just the last game out, he was a guy that got a little bit more extra usage there with the Devon Achane injury. Now you have Achane coming back, seems to be fully healthy. I think they're going to get back to seeing Miami do what Miami does and utilize both running backs in this backfield, take a lot of the onus off of Tyler Huntley, take a lot of that pressure off of him in the passing game, and really try to kind of control the clock with both running backs. Good matchup for Raheem Mostert here. I think he might be able to sneak in a touchdown if they were to get down close. And for me, that's the tiebreaker here.
And it's just Mostert's another one of those very exciting players that can bust one here. But you almost wonder at what point are those days done? We haven't necessarily seen it this year, but it still could happen. Interesting play on Thursday Night Football here. The Saints had it roughly at midfield. Rattler dropped back to pass, and there was a free rusher that came in, hit him from the blind side. Could not tell if the pass was going forward. I think that's what they're looking at right now to see if it was a fumble or an incomplete pass. I do believe they are going to rule this a fumble, and Denver will take over at their own 45-yard line as they are already up 3-0, 3.5 minutes to go in the first quarter. It is officially a turnover now as the Broncos take over. We'll give you what's going on in that going forward. After we talk about some receiver start sits, the scam, the scheme, Ponzi, whatever his nickname is for PPR, Wan'Dale Robinson, one of my favorite players in the league because I love exploiting him in PPR leagues. I love rolling him out as my flex every week. What do you do with him this week against the Eagles? Or if you wanted to roll with Xavier Worthy, again, another player who only needs one play to make a fantasy week, all the speed in the world, and Juju Smith-Schuster on the injury report as of today with a hamstring. Wan'Dale Robinson or Xavier Worthy if you can only play one, Merch?
It's Wan'Dale for me easily here between the two. Just because Wan'Dale we've seen even with neighbors in, neighbors out, he's schemed into this offense from a PPR standpoint. Like you mentioned, he's a guy that's heavily involved, a lot of targets, although they're not highly valued targets. He's not really seeing a lot of usage down in the red zone. He's getting you a steady dose of receptions, a steady dose of yardage here. So for me, I'm going to go Wan'Dale Robinson, where Xavier Worthy is more of kind of that home run type of play. It feels like he has to be schemed into the offense. He's topped out at 3 receptions in each of the last 2 games. Just not really seeing a lot from a target standpoint. Scored in back-to-back weeks, but those have been kind of fluke plays as well, too. Yeah. The rushing touchdown in the last game, which actually I'm still a little bit bitter about, caused me to lose a high-stakes game by less than half of a point. So we're gonna that neither here nor there. I'm still gonna go with Wan'Dale Robinson.
The only argument I can make is the fact that the Chiefs are really going to be hurting at receiver. No Rashee Rice, potentially no Juju Smith-Schuster. We'll see if he practices tomorrow. Then you're looking at Mecole Hardman and Justin Watson. And listen, you give Patrick Mahomes a ketchup packet, he'll whip up some sort of gourmet tomato basil soup. I know what he can do. Yes. The other issue is, too, in regards to that, I do believe it is a 1:00 game between the Giants and the Eagles this week. I'm verifying that right now just to make sure. Yes, 1:00. Yes. Late game for the Niners and Chiefs. You may not know the status of Smith-Schuster when you have to start Robinson. You know that he's got a floor. There is a bit of a ceiling there. I guess I'm on board with Robinson versus Worthy given the setup right now, even though Worthy could have a game. Yeah. How about this? This is 2 players that we didn't think were going to be compared to each other at the start of the year, but they are now for differing scenarios. Khalil Shakir could be his last week as the quote-unquote number 1 receiver in Buffalo, or Jalen Waddle, who is going to be catching passes once again from Tyler Huntley as the second option on the team. If you can only play one of these guys, is it Shakir or is it Waddle this week?
Another close call between these two. I do have Shakir slightly ranked ahead of Waddle. A lot of that's going to be valued based on the Amari Cooper situation. We've talked about that in this show. Amari Cooper not expected to play, I don't think. So that's going to give Khalil Shakir another week to be healthy. We mentioned that earlier too. He was a little bit banged up going into last week's game, which is kind of why you saw a little bit of that, kind of a down game from Shakir, I think. Now this week, home matchup, Tennessee Titans, the secondary, they're pretty good, pretty decent for the Titans. Matchups not the greatest, but I think you're going to see another solid, 6 tight target game for Khalil Shakir in this one. Solid receiving yard output, chance to get into the end zone here, where Jalen Waddle, and I just mentioned it with Raheem Mostert, I think you're going to see a little bit more of kind of a ground-oriented attack from the Dolphins this week and really kind of pick and choose their spots when it comes to the receiving aspect of this game. That, for me, I'm going to give it a little bit of the edge to Khalil Shakir here.
Shakir over Waddle. It's tough for me to disagree with that. I do think that this could be the last hurrah for him. And Waddle is getting closer and closer to being relevant again as we get closer and closer to Tagovailoa coming back for sure. But for this week, I can get on board. Shakir over Waddle. Quentin Johnston, the phenom that was scoring all those touchdowns earlier in the season. He's only at 3 right now. 14 catches, 164 yards on the season. He's got 3 touches. Would you play him or would you play Michael Wilson this week, bearing in mind that Marvin Harrison still has not cleared concussion protocol and is, I wouldn't say looking like a long shot for this weekend's game. Remember, he does get the extra night since they play on Monday Night Football. Yep. Michael Wilson or Quentin Johnston this week. Which one would you rather play, Merch?
Well, that's a good thing about this. You got both games are Monday night kickoffs. Both have a little. For the biggest question for me is going to be the Marvin Harrison Jr. situation. If he's not playing, Michael Wilson by a landslide here, I think is going to be the play. I would have him in the lineup easily with that matchup. He's going to be obviously the top wide receiving option there. Obviously, a lot of it's going to go through Trey McBride from a target perspective. But Quentin Johnston's just right now, he's just a little bit unsteady. Came out of the gates hot, started really well, but we've seen him kind of come back to earth the last 2 to 3 games. Now you've got Ladd McConkey's a little bit banged up. Josh Palmer come back healthy last week. They opened the practice window for DJ Shark this week, which doesn't really speak much. But it's for me, I like Michael Wilson to be more of the steady contributor here if Harrison's out. If Harrison plays, it's more of a coin toss, but probably will give the coin toss to Quentin Johnston and that aspect. If Harrison plays, I'm going Johnston. Harrison's out, I'm going Michael Wilson easily.
Michael Wilson against the 49ers, 5 catches for 78 yards. He also had an 8 catch for 64-yard game against the Lions this year. He has flash. You just got to hopefully hope that he avoids the clunker this week. And if Harrison is out, he should avoid the clunker. He is the highest upside guy of anybody in that Arizona pass catching receiving core, not named Trey McBride, obviously. Let's move on to tight end. Speaking of McBride, who would you rather play this week, Zach Ertz or Pat Freiermuth? Ertz is getting the really good matchup against Carolina. However, will his services be needed in the second half much? I don't know. He did have that really slow start. I think it was last week where he caught nothing in the first half. And then like the first or second drive of the second half, it was like, boom, Ertz. But like he caught like 4 or 5 balls right in a row. So you have that. And you also have Pat Freiermuth this week, who may or may not, we haven't talked about this at all, may or may not be getting a new quarterback with Russell Wilson over Justin Fields. Yeah, so how do we handle this for fantasy? Because there are a lot of teams that can only play one of these guys, and they probably have both these guys on their team, Ertz or Freiermuth, Brandon.
I'm going to give the edge to Zach Ertz here, just more or less from the usage standpoint. He's been the kind of the de facto number 2 option in the receiving category for the Commanders. Feels like that's been a situation really with Kingsbury in general. He likes to really rely on the tight end most of the time with his passing game coordination. So I like Ertz this week. Freiermuth, he's really kind of a boomer bust. Does he get in the end zone type of a player? Doesn't get in the end zone last week, puts up a clunker, gets in the end zone the 2 prior weeks, and was startable option for you those 2 weeks. So I don't see him having that option to really kind of be a touchdown scoring threat this week against the Jets defense. That's a really low scoring game there potentially. Whereas we talked about it before, Washington, Carolina, there's a good chance that we're going to see some points put on the board there. And I think Ertz can really take advantage of that.
They've reached the end of the first quarter, and there's not a lot of points on the board in New Orleans right now. Denver leading 3-0. It is 1st and 10 in the red zone at the New Orleans 17 for the Broncos. We'll give you the updates when play resumes there. We have a question from LeBron's in the YouTube chat right now. I'm going to say Wan'Dale Robinson over Nick Chubb in PPR. I'm going to say Wan'Dale Robinson over Nick Chubb in half-point PPR. If it's non-PPR, Brandon Murchison, would you then play Chubb over Wan'Dale Robinson? Or is that still not enough for you to say no to Robinson in your lineup this week over Chubb?
Wow. So standard/classic format.
Classic, yeah. Iron Man, meat and potato fantasy football.
My goodness, I'm probably going to give the edge to Chubb. I'm going to hope he scores a touchdown because I don't see that being an option for Robinson. And that point, you're going for, a point for every 10 yards, and you're likely only going to see a 5 to 6 point output for Robinson on the high end. Whereas Chubb, he can get you those 4 to 5 points on 5-6 rushes, and then
or
possibly
one carry into the end zone. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the way to look at it. Moving on at tight end. So hopefully that helps you, LeBron's. Moving on to tight end, Mark Andrews, who had a bit of a renaissance last week for the Ravens, or Dalton Schultz, who will be in Green Bay catching passes from C.J. Stroud when the Texans take on the Packers. Which one, Andrews or Schultz this week? How do the Murchison rankings look?
Well, the Murchison rankings look as though I have Dalton Schultz ranked ahead. He is my last tight end 1 ranked for this week. So he's tight end 12 coming into this week, where Andrews, I have at tight end 14. So feeling Dalton Schultz a little bit more this week. We mentioned, you know, Andrews kind of come back to life a little bit last week, found the end zone finally. Maybe that was because I picked him up in an experts league that somebody dropped him right before kickoff. Not saying there's a correlation between the two, but Dalton Schultz, 14 targets over the last 2 games. Now gets another matchup. Nico Collins not playing on the road in Green Bay. We've talked about it ad nauseum at this point. A lot of points expected to be on the board there. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Dalton Schultz in this game. That's going to give the edge to Schultz for me.
2-part question on this one. Merch, how did you feel about Theo Johnson when he got drafted by the Giants, given his athletic profile at Penn State? And would you still consider him over Grant Calcaterra this week as they're playing each other if Goedert misses, assuming Calcaterra would get the start then?
Well, the athletic profile you mentioned of Theo Johnson, he was one of the guys that I was really, really heavily invested in coming out of the NFL draft. I thought it was a great landing spot. But it's really the kind of the tale that's old as time when it comes to rookie tight ends. You're not expecting a lot early on in the season, but you're really wanting to see these guys kind of break out after the halfway point as coaching staff really going to get an idea of what they have in the player and how to utilize them moving forward as the kind of the year progresses. Theo Johnson's that type of player. I think he's a guy that in these deeper leagues, especially FFPC formats, you've got that tight end premium. He's a guy you do want to kind of roster towards the end of your bench to just see how things shake out. But in terms of week 7 and what we've talked about on this program already, I think Calcaterra presents the most upside. Filling into that Dallas Goedert role. I just think there's an opportunity for him to put up a Dallas Goedert type of performance this week. Should be kind of in that range of a tight end 1 type of an outcome. So I'm going to give him the edge this week and play Calcaterra.
Yeah, we didn't even mention this, but Malik Neighbors clears concussion protocol today, expected to be active on Sunday too. Yep. So now you got Neighbors and Robinson, not to mention maybe Singletary and for sure Tyrone Tracy back there. Uphill sledding for Theo Johnson. You can easily see a better path to fantasy goodness from Grant Calcaterra this week. Let's move on and talk about the quarterbacks here. We'll lead it off with Joe Burrow going against the Cleveland Browns or Jordan Love against the Houston Texans. I know I love me some Love with all those points at Lambeau Field, their expected points. Burrow, negative game script for him this week. It could be something where they get an early lead and they're coasting with Chase Brown and Zach Moss in the second half. Burrow or Love here for you, Brandon?
That's kind of the same mindset that I have coming into this situation. If I'm looking at these two right now, I'm going to go with Jordan Love. I'm going to love me some Love this week myself.
Yep. The power of love, baby. The power of love.
What a callback there. Great song. Oh man.
Back to the Future, right? That was the Back to the Future
theme
Back
song, to the Future song.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
We got to get some sort of music video going virally here in Northeast Wisconsin for that. Interesting happenings here in the Broncos Saints game. Denver has it 4th and 1 at the inside the 10 for the Saints. They take a delay of game penalty and end up kicking a field goal here. So Will Lutz gets the 32-yard field goal. I don't know what exactly happened, if that was a design thing. Denver obviously has all 3 timeouts. They could have taken a timeout, but it's Will Lutz again on the board. 6-0 now, Denver leading New Orleans, 13:24 to go in the first half. They take advantage of that Spencer Rattler fumble.
I mentioned it in the chat. We got a Will Lutz revenge game, ladies and gentlemen.
I didn't even realize that was a thing, and you're totally right. Will Lutz revenge game tonight, as he is coming into the Big Easy and making it a big, hard proposition for the Saints. to try to come back against the Broncos tonight. Mike Sullivan, Zay Flowers or T. Higgins. He's in the YouTube chat right now. Flowers or Higgins? I'm leaning towards Higgins in this matchup, even after what I just said about the Bengals maybe not having to throw the ball a whole lot in the second half. The Ravens get the, you know what? I'm going to take it back. I'm going to say Flowers because this is a game on Monday Night Football where the Ravens are favored, but not by much. And this could be a game that comes down to making every single play correctly in the third and fourth quarter. And that's going to involve more Flowers than Higgins. So I'm going to reverse course. I'm going to say Flowers over Higgins here. And it seems like you agree.
That's the correct move. You are correct, sir.
There you go.
With this one here, we have. I think you finally see the Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense have found what they needed to do with Zay Flowers here. And over the last 2 weeks, you're looking at 21 targets, 16 receptions, 100 yards in both games. He's riding a hot streak. I think he continues in this game, which could be back and forth against a secondary that is gettable. For me, that's Zay Flowers easily here.
Would you play Brock Purdy at home against the Chiefs over C.J. Stroud on the road against the Packers?
I would not. I do have C.J. Stroud ranked slightly ahead of Brock Purdy. I've got C.J. Stroud at QB 9 coming into the week, Brock Purdy at QB 10. So neck and neck. I just feel like we talked about it earlier too, is that this Chiefs 49ers game, probably a little bit closer of a game, lesser points being scored between these two teams as opposed to what we have mentioned now several times, the Houston Texans Green Bay Packers game, higher points total, a lot more excitement up and down the field between the two offenses, and I think that upside alone is going to give C.J. Stroud the upper hand here.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's Stroud, and especially if Jordan Mason comes back, could be a big Jordan Mason game, and maybe more taken off the plate of Brock Purdy this week. Stroud, I think, is going to have to keep throwing and throwing and throwing. Let's do this final one. Drake May or Anthony Richardson here. Richardson expected to be back. Both these guys, talented rushers, and I think that's the thing that we forget about with Drake May is he can still make things happen with his legs. Impressive, at least semi-impressive debut for May last week. Who would you rather play this week? Drake May against the Jaguars Sunday morning in London, or would you be taking Anthony Richardson against the Dolphins who are coming off the bye?
As strange as it is to say this, and if you'd asked me a month and a half ago, I would have told you were crazy.
Exactly. I would have too. Absolutely.
I'm taking Drake May. It's right now, it's a wait and see thing with Anthony Richardson. He's coming back from the injury, but even prior to the injury, he's been underperforming. He's been a guy that's been boom or bust. He's not really utilizing his legs like we thought he would be coming into the season, which really takes away from his upside and his potential. So for me, if I had to decide between these two, Drake May has a great matchup. It's overseas. The Jaguars secondary is awful. They made Caleb Williams look like an all-pro out there in the game against the Bears. And so I think that's going to continue. I think another rookie quarterback is going to pick apart the Jaguars, and Drake May is going to look good. I'm going to start him over Richardson.
Last question tonight comes from Mike Sullivan in the YouTube chat. Okay, if we're playing Flowers over Higgins, would we play Higgins over Reed? The answer for me is no. I'm still playing Jaden Reed over Higgins as well.
Also playing Reed over Higgins. Yeah.
There you go. Hopefully that helps, Mike. Brandon Murchison, this has been so much fun hanging out with you once again. These 2 hours always fly by when we get together and do this show. For anybody who is craving more of your content, they can find your rankings, number one, at rotoballer.com. They can find them at fantasypros.com as well. Tell us about the Woo Fantasy Podcast and anywhere else that we can consume more Brandon Murchison content.
Obviously, Woo Fantasy Podcast. Check that out. That's at Woo_fantasy on Twitter as well. Follow us there. It's a Woo Fantasy on YouTube as well. So give us a shout out there. Written content. I'm going to have some written content. I do a little bit of that. That's going to be found through Fantasy Pros that you can check that out. Then also too, this Sunday morning, I've started a Fantasy Pros Discord show that I do on Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. So if you're not a member, go sign up for the Discord for Fantasy Pros. I've dubbed it the Rise and Shine with Roto Superstar morning show. So I answer all your questions, lineup questions, anything you might have through the Discord channel there. So you can be able to follow me there, pull it up. If you got any of these questions like we've had through the chat all the show long, definitely hit me up there. Hit me on Twitter as well. And I'll be ready and willing and able to answer any and all of your questions.
Merch, always a pleasure, man. Let's do this again real soon, dude.
Man, anytime you need me, I am there, sir.
You are the man. Thank you, Brandon Murchison, and our producer, Matt Deutsch, tonight. We're off next week, but at 7:00 p.m. on Halloween night, Thursday, October 31st, Fantasy Pros and the Wheel Routes, Kevin Wheeler will co-host with me as well. So, again, no show next week, but Wheels and I will do the show on Halloween night. FFPC Weekly Challenge, myffpc.com is where to go for that. Play that. Enjoy the rest of the game tonight. Enjoy Week 7. Remember, early morning for Rise and Shine with Roto Superstar on the Fantasy Pros Discord. And then Jaguars, Patriots, 2 Monday night games this week. It's going to be a great week of football and fantasy football. For our producer, Matt Deutsch, and Brandon Murchison, I'm Eric Balkman. This has been the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.